Welcome to Small Grains for Organic Systems module.
This module was authored by Nicole Totjes, Christine Moncada, Constance Carlson, and Craig Schaefer of the University of Minnesota in 2017 and was updated in 2026. Narrated by Constance Carlson, with additional narration generated using the AI voice of Hannah from 11 Labs.
Many organic farmers find small grains to be a beneficial addition to their rotations. In this module, we will discuss growing small grains organically in the upper Midwest.
These topics include planting, weed management, disease management, insect pest management, fertility management, harvest and storage, and marketing.
The most common small grains grown in the Midwest are rye, wheat, oats, and barley. While these small grains look similar, management practices, quality considerations, and marketing differ markedly among small grain species.
We show images of each of these 4 species growing in the field. They all have formed seed heads and are close to harvest.
In addition to these commonly grown small grains, triticale is a newer small grain crop and is the product of a man-made cross between rye and wheat. Triticale grain makes good poultry feed and is also popular for forage production, whether cut fresh or ensiled or hayed.
In this image, the field of triticale is still in a vegetative stage.
Small grains can be very useful from an agronomic standpoint in transition to organic crop rotations. There are a number of end uses for small grains, especially wheat, which can be milled into flour for baking many food products. While rye, barley, and oats are usually used for lower value animal feed, food-grade markets may be available for organic and transitioning grains. Also, within each of the small grain species, growers should consider the variety that is appropriate for the target market or end use.
This image shows the seed grains of different small grains along with the breads, rolls, crackers, and granola that are made with the various small grains.
The competitiveness of small grains with weeds is very important for transitioning systems, where there is a learning curve associated with organic weed management, and it is important to keep weed pressure low to ensure success once the land is certified. Small grains, especially when fall sown, accumulate high levels of biomass, which is a benefit for building soil organic matter and improving soil quality, important goals of transitioning systems. Selecting the right species for your rotation will involve consideration of marketing, weed competitiveness needs, and residue management strategies. Small grains can be very useful in transition to organic rotations due to their superior competitiveness with weeds compared with other crops. However, there are differences in competitiveness among small grain crop species. Generally, rye and triticale are considered the most competitive with weeds, followed by barley and oats, followed by wheat as the least competitive with weeds. Rye is believed to have allelopathic properties. Allelopathy is the ability of a plant to produce biochemicals that can affect the germination, growth, survival, and reproduction of other plants. In this case, rye's allelopathic properties can be exploited to reduce weed pressure in transitioning systems. Other small grains like barley have also demonstrated allelopathic potential. Regardless, the rapid germination and growth of small grain species makes them highly competitive with weeds. Increasing the seeding rate by up to 1.5 times the normal rate is recommended for increasing small grain competitiveness with weeds. Building up soil organic matter levels, which are generally lower in conventional systems, is extremely important during the transition to organic period. As organic approved fertilizer inputs generally release nutrients more slowly than conventional chemical fertilizers, it is important to have a stock of nutrients already within soils, stored in soil organic matter.
In these two images, we show examples of the fibrous root systems of small grains. Here, the plants have been pulled out of the soil to expose their many small roots that extend several inches deep.
Small grains have fibrous root systems, which contribute to soil organic matter to a much greater extent than larger roots like those of corn and soybean. Therefore, by including small grains in organic rotations, you can bank nutrients more effectively for future crops than other crops can. Furthermore, nutrient requirements of small grains are generally lower than those of corn. Small grains are generally planted with a grain drill.
In this image, we show a tractor with a grain drill planting barley in a field.
Small grains should be planted at a depth of 1.5 to 2 inches into a uniform level seed bed to maximize emergence and stand uniformity. Planting winter grains into standing stubble or residue protects small grain plants from wind and ice and greatly decreases the risk of winter kill. It is also advisable to plant small grains in rotation after a legume or brassica crop, rather than following a grass crop like corn, to decrease disease pressure and nutrient input requirements. It is recommended for organically managed small grains that row spacing be kept narrow to increase crop competition with weeds. Many have observed this practice to decrease weed pressure and increase grain yields. Some organic farmers in our region have been successful with spacing as narrow as 6 inches.
Here we show a picture of young small grain seedlings that were planted in narrow rows that are about 7 inches apart.
Seeding rates differ among small grain species.
Here is a table of small grain species and their recommended seeding rates in conventional systems. Barley, oat, and winter wheat seeding rates are 150 to 200 pounds per acre. Rye is 120 to 175 pounds per acre. Winter triticale is 140 to 190 pounds per acre. Spring triticale is 175 to 250 pounds per acre. Lastly, spring wheat is 174 to 225 pounds per acre.
Seeding rates identified for conventional systems using a 7-inch row spacing are shown here. Organic growers should seed at the higher end of these ranges and follow recommendations according to specific variety recommendations. Spring-planted grain seeding rates are generally greater than fall-planted rates. For spring grains, optimum planting dates are shown here for the state of Minnesota, and typically it is recommended that spring grains be planted as early as possible to avoid hot summer temperatures and to maximize yields.
Here is a map of Minnesota labeled with different zones. Zone 1 is the southernmost part of the state. The optimum planting date for Zone 1 is the first week of April, and the latest planting is the first week of May. Zone 2 is central Minnesota. The optimum planting date for Zone 2 is the second week of April, and the latest is the second week of May. Zone 3 is a small area that is central and western, but slightly north of Zone 2. The optimum planting date for Zone 3 is the third week of April, and the latest is the third week of May. Zone 4 is the second most northern zone. The optimum planting date is the fourth week of April, and the latest is the fourth week of May. Zone 5 is the northernmost region of Minnesota. The optimum planting date is the first week of May, and the latest is the first week of June.
Planting later than the last planting date shown here will likely result in yield loss. Delayed planting as a weed management tactic should not be used for small grains. For those of you in other parts of the region, follow local extension recommendations for planting. Planting at the proper time is essential for prevention of disease and yield loss.
We show a map of Minnesota divided into 3 sections labeled with zones 1 through 3. The southernmost strip is Zone 1, The central Minnesota section is Zone 2, and the northernmost area is Zone 3. Note these zones are different from the zones in the previous slide.
Winter rye, triticale, and wheat should be planted between September 20th and October 10th in areas south of Rochester, September 10th to 30th in central to southern Minnesota, and September 1st to September 15th in northern Minnesota. Planting earlier than these recommended dates increases risk of disease. Variety selection is important for all crops planted on a farm. Seed is an investment, and purposefully selecting a variety to fit your farm's needs will provide the best return on your seed investment. Small grain varieties should be selected on the basis of early maturity, disease resistance, and grain quality. While yield is important, high yields but low quality can decrease returns. Winter grains should be selected on the basis of proven winter hardiness in your region. Seeking out certified seed will decrease the risk of weed seed contamination during crop establishment. Always be sure to use organic approved seed and check with your certifier. Another option for organic small grains cultivation is to underseed with a legume like red clover. The red clover can be mowed for forage or for weed control, or grazed after small grain harvest. Using a straight point chisel in red clover in the fall will set red clover back and prevent too heavy of clover pressure and competitiveness with your cash crop in the spring.
In this image, we show a close-up of a maturing barley crop with young red clover seedlings growing underneath.
A grower planning on following a small grain with alfalfa, a great crop for the transition period, can drill alfalfa at a depth of 1/4 inch with winter or spring grains. This practice decreases weed pressure during the small grain phase and the establishing alfalfa phase, where weed pressure can be a challenge. The small grain crop can be harvested over the top of the alfalfa, which will then be left to grow for subsequent years of the rotation.
In this image, we show young alfalfa plants growing in the residue of a previous small grain crop.
Organic management often requires out-of-the-box strategies to increase crop competitiveness with weeds. Some organic growers will drill small grains twice across the field, with rows at 45 or 90-degree angles to increase crop plant density.
In this picture, we show cross-planted rows of young small grain plants. These rows have been planted at 45-degree angles to each other.
Organic growers report that this practice usually decreases weed pressure. While small grains are more competitive against weeds compared to many other crops, it doesn't mean problems with weeds will never occur.
This picture shows a field of maturing small grains with flowering Canada thistle invading the field edge.
It may be necessary to control weeds post-emergence in small grain stands. A tine weeder is a popular implement for this task and can be used to uproot small seeded weeds without uprooting the crop, if proper depth and down pressure settings are used. Tine weeders work best in loose or lightly crusted soil without long-stemmed residue, and can be used until small grains are jointing, after which weeding should be avoided as to not damage the growing point.
In this image, we show a tractor with a tine weeder implement operating in a field of young small grain plants.
They are normally operated between 4 and 8 miles per hour. Harrows are similar to tine weeders, but can be more aggressive and cause crop damage. Rotary hoes are another post-emergence weeding implement popular for organic systems. Rotary hoes are generally operated at speeds from 5 to 15 miles per hour, with surface aggressiveness increasing and soil penetration decreasing as speeds increase. They can also be used to aerate crusted soils.
In this image, a tractor with a rotary hoe implement is operating in a field. The soil disturbance is apparent due to the dust and debris in the air.
Some growers will use both tine weeders and rotary hoes in the same crop, as they have different weeding actions that are effective for different weed species. Timing of post-emergence weeding is crucial for effectiveness. Tine weeders and rotary hoes should be used when soil is moist enough for penetration but not moist enough for compaction to occur. These implements are most effective when weeds are just emerging and are not effective when weed roots have developed.
Here are two images comparing weed size and whether post-emergence weeding will be effective. The weeds on the right are still at seedling stage and are about ½ inch in height. They are the correct size for post-emergence tillage. The weeds on the right are several inches tall and past seedling stage. They are too large for post-emergence tillage.
However, if performed with the right timing, these implements can greatly decrease weed pressure and benefit crop yields. Test passes should be performed on a small corner of each field to adjust settings depending on soil firmness and crop and weed response to tine pressure. Any implement used for post-emergence weed control should be tested at the intended operating speed in a small area of the field and adjusted, so as not to cause crop damage throughout the entire field.
This image shows a field after a test pass. The operation shows much crop damage from the mechanical weeding operation. Some of the crop plants have been uprooted and others have been buried by soil.
Perennial weeds like Canada thistle are often the most troublesome weeds for organic growers, especially in small grain crops. High densities of perennials like Canada thistle can cause yield losses of up to 90%. Repeated mowing or aggressive tillage, like a rototiller, performed bi-monthly in perennial weed patches can alleviate pressure over the course of 2 to 3 years, but require large time investments. If possible, establishment of a perennial crop like alfalfa will increase crop competition with perennial weeds and may reduce pressure of subsequent grain crops in rotation. Using diverse rotations that mix crops with different life cycles, like perennial versus annual, different planting times, like spring versus winter crops, and different harvest cycles, like mowing for forage versus harvesting grain, is the best way to prevent weed, disease, and insect pressure from building up, and is highly encouraged in organic systems. Without the ability to use pesticides, prevention is key in organic systems. There are different diseases that can affect small grains. In this section, we will cover a few of them briefly.
This image shows a close-up of a leaf blade of a small grain plant. It is diseased with yellow and brown splotches.
Research has been done on several pests and how long they persist in fields without their hosts. Here are just a few examples.
This table lists diseases and the number of years without planting a small grain host that it takes to break the pest cycle. Fusarium will take 1 to 2 years without a host to break the pest cycle. Septoria leaf gloom blotch will need 2 years. Bacterial leaf blight will need 2 years. Common root rot will need 2 years. Ergot will need 1 year. Lastly, scab will need 2 to 3 years. This data is from Wiersma et al., 2010.
With the exception of scab, most small grain diseases fail to persist in a field without a small grain host after 2 years, meaning that 2 years of crop rotation away from small grain cultivation should be sufficient to keep disease pressure low. However, rotating to a different crop alone is not sufficient. Producers must understand which crops can serve as hosts to which diseases and avoid growing these crops adjacent in rotations. For example, Fusarium, the fungus that causes Fusarium head blight, can overwinter in corn and other warm season grass residues.
In this picture, we show the seed heads of healthy barley and barley infected with Fusarium head blight. The healthy seed head has a consistent yellowish-green color, while the diseased seed head has some grains that are brown.
In general, growers should avoid growing small grains after corn, Sudan grass, millet, and other small grains in rotation. Growers should grow small grains after pea, sunflower, alfalfa, soybean, or other legume crops. Fungal diseases are generally the most troublesome in small grain production. The rusts reduce yields by reducing the photosynthetic leaf area of the plant and by increasing plant water loss. In other regions, spores overwinter on straw and can infect subsequent crops by dispersing from the straw, but do not generally survive the winter in Minnesota. Spores of the fungus that cause rust are usually brought to Minnesota via wind. Rust-resistant varieties are available and should be selected if a grower has observed rust on their farm in the past. Growers should rotate rust-resistant varieties, as resistance in one variety can break down under heavy disease pressure. Root rots have also been observed in Minnesota wheat, caused by a number of soil-borne fungi. Plants infected with root rots often occur in patches and are easily pulled from the soil. Root rot causes moisture and nutrient stress in plants and reduces grain yields, sometimes causing wheat heads to be white and empty of filled grain. Currently, rotation is recommended to limit root rot in wheat and barley crops in Minnesota. Do not plant small grains into small grain stubble or unburied residue. Ensure seed saved from small grain crops for later planting comes from fields where no disease was observed. The last type of small grains pest we will cover are insect pests.
In this image, we show the mature larva of a wheat stem sawfly.
Wheat stem sawfly and Hessian fly are the two most common insect pests in small grains, especially wheat in Minnesota. In organic systems, fly pest pressure is usually prevented by using long rotations, similar to those used to prevent diseases, and with resistant varieties. Wheat stem sawflies usually damage wheat the most, as their name suggests, and cause less damage in barley and oat. In wheat, larvae hatched from the eggs laid inside the wheat stem hatch and chew around the inside of wheat stem, causing lodging or breakage.
This photo shows the stems of a small grain crop that have fallen over due to wheat stem sawfly.
Detection and scouting for wheat stem sawflies can be performed by sampling wheat stems around a field, paying attention to the field edges where insect pressure often occurs. Stems can be split open and the percentage containing S-shaped sawfly larvae calculated.
This image shows a close-up of the cross-section of a stem that contains a whitish larva.
If infestation levels exceed 15%, producers can use stripper headers to pick lodged stems up from the ground at harvest. Stripper headers can also leave taller stubble, which is beneficial for parasitic wasps that can serve as a biological control for wheat stem sawfly.
Here we show a stripper header operating in a small grain field. The equipment harvests the top of the plants where the seed heads are and leaves behind several inches of the plant stems.
Some solid-stemmed wheat varieties are resistant to sawfly and can also support parasitoid wasps, which can be beneficial for controlling sawfly. If you wish to use a hollow stem variety but know that sawflies will be present, plant a solid stem variety of wheat around the edge of your field as a trap crop. Hessian flies are a pest that often creates damage to winter wheat in Minnesota.
In this photo, we show an adult fly on a leaf blade. It looks somewhat like a mosquito.
The best way to prevent Hessian fly infestation is to practice good crop rotation and destroy small grain volunteers in other crop phases of a rotation prior to planting winter wheat, as they can harbor the Hessian fly. Aphids are troublesome pests in small grains because they serve as vectors for diseases like barley yellow dwarf virus, which affects most small grain species.
Here are two photos. The first shows a close-up of an aphid and demonstrates how very small aphids are. The second shows a small grain plant infected with wheat streak mosaic virus. One of the visible symptoms of the disease is yellowing of the leaf blades.
Mites serve as vectors for wheat streak mosaic virus on large acreages of winter wheat, which causes stunting, lack of head production, and poor grain fill. Control grass volunteers to prevent aphid and mite infestations, and do not plant winter wheat within 1/8 mile of fields known to be infested. Integrated pest management is a management approach that is highly encouraged and likely essential for successful organic small grains production. The concepts encompassed by integrated pest management are applicable for managing weeds, diseases, and insect pests, and the method emphasizes preventative over response measures. Prevention of pest outbreaks is the best way to manage pests in organic systems, as response measures in organic systems generally only work to a limited extent on some pest species. A number of cultural controls and methods contribute to crop protection. Trap crops are crops planted strategically on a crop field or landscape to draw pests away from the crop and onto the trap crop. The value of using crop rotation, volunteer control, increased seeding rates, and resistant varieties was previously discussed and should be emphasized again. Ultimately, a healthy crop stand is your best defense against yield-reducing pest outbreaks. Therefore, another important cultural control is maintaining good soil fertility for crop nutrient needs. Let's move on from pests to fertility management in organic small grains. Nitrogen is often the most limiting nutrient in organic systems. Low nitrogen fertility in soils, leading to nitrogen deficiency in crops, can result in weak crop stands that are not competitive with weeds.
On this slide is a picture of two wheat plots. The plot on the right was unfertilized and is shorter with more weeds. The plot on the left was fertilized with manure and is taller with no visible weeds.
This trend is evident in the picture, where weed competition in non-fertilized wheat is much greater than weed competition in wheat that had received livestock manure as fertilizer. Wheat yields were reduced in the non-fertilized plot by almost 50%. This illustrates the importance of soil nitrogen management for both crop nutrition and competitiveness. Crop nitrogen deficiency is usually characterized by yellowing of leaves and stands, and it can be seen especially in low areas where nitrogen is susceptible to loss.
The picture on this slide shows yellowish leaves in a low spot in a small grain field. The plants with the yellowish leaves are deficient in nitrogen.
Soil fertility should be managed to prevent these symptoms, as they represent yield loss. If organic fertilizer inputs are being applied, nitrogen requirements of a crop are generally calculated with yield goals in mind. As a general rule, 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen is needed to make 1 bushel of wheat. Soil tests should be conducted to measure soil nitrogen prior to planting the crop, and soil nitrate and ammonium levels should be subtracted from the fertilizer needed to meet your yield goal. Estimating release of nitrogen from manures and composts is complex, but obtaining a nutrient test for the organic input will help you to determine how much plant available, ammonium and nitrate N, is present in the manure, and how much total nitrogen it contains. Small grains take up the most nitrogen in the growth stages that span from tillering to early flowering, so fertilizer application and release should be planned to correspond with these growth stages. While soil nitrogen management is of perpetual concern in the short term of organic systems, phosphorus is of more concern in the long term. Phosphorus is ubiquitous in soils, but only a small portion of the total soil phosphorus pool is available to plants. More soil phosphorus becomes available at lower soil pH, more acidic soils. But plant and soil microbial growth is reduced at low pH, representing a trade-off between hospitable conditions for plants and phosphorus bioavailability. Long-term observations of organic farming systems indicate that the soil bioavailable phosphorus pool is depleted over time through the export of P in crop biomass and grain, and exported P must be replaced if organic operations are to remain productive in the long term. External fertilizer inputs may be necessary to amend soil P. Rock phosphate is mined phosphorus from natural deposits and is certified organic approved for use. However, rock phosphate reserves are finite and being depleted. Therefore, reliance on rock phosphate for P for organic systems is not encouraged. Other good sources of phosphorus are livestock or poultry manure, compost, fish emulsion, and bone meal.
Here we show a picture of a field where compost has been applied. The dark compost can be seen on the soil surface between the rows of the stubble from the previous crop.
There is some evidence that legumes purposefully exude organic acids from their roots to make phosphorus available in soil, though it is unclear if this has carryover effects into the next crop in rotation. Nonetheless, diverse crop rotations have been found to be beneficial for soil phosphorus fertility in organic systems. Application of composts or manure and diverse crop rotations should result in adequate levels of potassium and micronutrients, requiring no additional management. Small grains can be harvested for forage or for their grain. Small grain biomass cut prior to heading can make excellent forage, with dry matter digestibilities of 65 to 70% and crude protein levels around 15%. Small grain forage quality is greatest at the boot stage, where the head has emerged from the sheath.
Here is the boot stage of a small grain stem. The stem and leaf blade are visible, but the head can't be seen because it has yet to emerge.
Dry matter yields are greater if the grower waits until the dough stage, though quality is reduced relative to the boot stage. Forage quality decreases rapidly after the dough stage, after which forage harvest is not advisable. Grazing off small grains provides quality forage for cattle and can contribute to system diversification and nutrient cycling in your system, as cattle will deposit manure as they graze.
In this picture are several cows grazing on a field of small grain plants.
This can contribute to soil fertility for subsequent crops. Graze small grains intensively, leaving short stubble to discourage regrowth. Grazing can also control certain weed species if they are palatable to your grazing livestock. Most growers who produce small grains, however, harvest them for grain, as their name suggests. Small grains can be swathed and left to dry in the field in windrows, which speeds up the grain drying time and is performed in crops that are susceptible to lodging, if grain is left to dry while the plant is still standing. Swathing is also beneficial when there are many green weeds in the field when the small grain crop is drying down. Letting the stand dry in windrows will allow weed biomass to dry down and not clog up the combine like they will when they are still green.
A few rules for when to swath. Swath when the stalks 1 inch below the spikes are yellow. Swath when grain moisture is 35 to 40%.
After windrows are dry, a combine with a draper head, which is easier on the plant and leads to less shattering than an auger head, is used to pick up the windrow.
This image shows a close-up of a draper header. Combining should be done when grain moisture is less than 15%.
Swathing should not be used ahead of precipitation, and rain on a small grain windrow can cause pre-harvest sprouting and reduce grain quality. Direct combining has become more common as combine horsepower has increased and when fields are clean of weeds. Swathing will likely remain useful in organic systems where weeds are common and quick dry down is important. To increase quality of the grain lot, hand weed patches of mustards and other weeds that can impart an off flavor to the harvested grain.
This photo shows a pile of small grain seeds that have been contaminated by weed seeds, which are the small black seeds and the larger green seeds.
Clean grain with a rotary screen immediately after harvest to remove green material from the seed lot. Seed cleaning can also be conducted with a gravity table. If drying is required after direct combining or from a swathed windrow, 13% grain moisture is a good target for most small grains. Blowing air should be kept at low temperature so as not to damage the proteins in the grain. Blowing air temperature should not exceed 160 degrees Fahrenheit for grain at 16% moisture, 140 degrees Fahrenheit for grain at 20% moisture, and 120 degrees for grain at 24% moisture. End users of small grains are increasingly demanding in-depth quality analysis of grain, especially for food-grade grains. End users are interested in the falling number for wheat, triticale, rye, and barley, which indicates the degree of pre-harvest sprouting and starch degradation in the grain. Low falling numbers indicate pre-harvest sprouting and degraded grain quality. High protein is generally good for bread making in wheat and increases the value of feed quality grain. Vomitoxins are compounds that result from fungal contamination of the grain, which can result from high moisture while grain is either in the field or in storage after harvest. As the name suggests, vomitoxins are toxins, and very low levels are tolerated in a seed lot. Do not harvest infected areas of your field with the rest of the seed lot. Finding a buyer for your organic grain takes extra work beyond conventional grain marketing, as few organic grain elevators exist. Most organic growers spend a significant amount of time making contacts with buyers and on direct marketing. This extra time can pay off, as organic grains often command a price at least 2 times that of conventional small grains. However, it is important to keep marketing labor in mind when transitioning to organic production. See the Marketing module for more information. Ancient grains refer to ancient lines of small grains that have not undergone significant breeding efforts in the last few centuries, unlike wheat, rye, oat, and barley. Ancient grains related to wheat include einkorn, emmer, kamut, and spelt, and the market is growing for these grains in the health foods sector.
Here we show a close-up of spelt grains, which appear similar to wheat.
They are purported to be more nutritious than wheat, though there is little scientific evidence to support these health claims. Nonetheless, if markets are available, organic growers might investigate growing these. However, it might be best to first establish a test plot to do a preliminary evaluation of how they grow in a specific environment. Please consult our Growing a New Crop and Alternative Crops modules for steps to take when considering alternative small grains. Cultivation of these crops is generally similar to that of other small grains, though they tend to be taller than modern-day wheat and barley cultivars.
In this image, we show a close-up of the seeds of einkorn, which is an ancient type of wheat.
Grain yield potential of these ancient grains is generally much lower than modern cereals. Therefore, producers should negotiate a higher price for organically grown ancient grains than for organic wheat, barley, oats, or rye. Small grains are beneficial in organic rotations as they add crop life cycle diversity, are competitive with weeds, are efficient nutrient users, and have diverse end uses. Whether a grower chooses a winter-hardy variety to sow in the fall, providing ground cover over winter and greater yields earlier the following year, or spring-planted oats for forage, incorporation of small grains can add diversity to corn, soybean, or alfalfa hay rotations. Small grain residues can be left on the soil surface as a protective mulch, tilled in for organic matter, or even grazed. Small grains can contribute to soil organic matter and build soil health for your organic rotation in the long term. Thanks for watching our Small Grains module.
This project is supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Organic Transitions Program under Award Number 2013-5, 1106-2-1005. This project is supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Marketing Service, National Organic Program under the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, TOPP, in the Midwest region. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this publication are those of the authors and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or U.S. government determination or policy. The University of Minnesota shall provide equal access to and opportunity in its programs, facilities, and employment without regard to race, color, creed, religion, national origin, gender, age, marital status, familial status, disability, public assistance status, membership or activity in a local commission created for the purpose of dealing with discrimination, veteran status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. For more information about this project, please see organicag.umn.edu, copyright 2026, Regents of the University of Minnesota. All rights reserved.